really is kind of a brief report tonight. I just want to talk about enrollment trends, how are things looking, what's been happening historically. Look at some of the demographic trends that are affecting enrollment, things that affect everybody like birth trends, and then some specific things to you like housing that are going to affect your enrollment. Look at the projections and then draw some summary and conclusions. This is your enrollment trend from October going all the way back to October 1991. You know, you were at 12,000 students back in October 91 and now you're at over 18,000. So that's a pretty good gain over time, about 6,000 students over more than just a little over 2 decades. And not a surprising trend. You're in a district where you're not completely built out. They're building new homes. As the population grows, you get infill. And so you expect to see a trend like this. The thing that might be noticeable on this chart, overall there's a general upward trend, but you'll notice that little dip there around 2007 to 2009. The housing bubble burst in the Puget Sound, let me remind everybody, in the summer of 2007. And so home sales and prices dropped for about 3-4 years. Around 2012, 2013 started to recover a little bit. And so you see a down year there. But then you'll notice that even though we were in kind of a slow period in 2010, 2011, there was still some growth in Bethel. So there's still enough housing stock out there that they thought was, available to be built and sold. And so even though your trend hasn't been as dramatic as it was, say, between 2002 and 2007, you're still seeing continued growth. In the last couple of years, it's continuing up. This is the K-12 enrollment for Pierce County, and I should have gone back to 91 so I could show you exact comparison, but you can see again in the 90s there was big growth. This is all the school districts in Pierce County combined. Big growth in the 90s into 2000, and again you see this little sort of flattening out around 2007, 2008 when the housing bubble burst. There's also a little bit of an anomaly in here. Somewhere in 2007, Silicon started a virtual school, enrolled a bunch of students from Pierce County and around the state. And then a few years later, the state changed the funding formula and the school went away. And so some of this up and down movement here is a little bit attributable to that. But nevertheless, if you look at 2013 and 2014, again, we're starting to see a little bit of a trend up again in Pierce County. And this is your market share. This is like what share of the Pierce County K-12 public school enrollment do you have? So again, back in 91, you had about 11%, 11.3%. And again, it's trended up over time. So right now, you're just a little above 14% of the kids enrolled in your district in Pierce County. And just to give you a sense of how things are starting to change, this is the net change in enrollment over the past year for all the districts in Pierce County. So everybody's on this chart. Puyallup had a big gain, Tacoma, Sumner, Bethel. You can see that most of the districts saw a gain. There's a few that still saw a net loss. The overall gain was 1,169. That's the biggest gain in K-12 enrollment in Pierce County since 2006-07. So right before the housing bubble burst, we were seeing gains like this on an annual basis. So again, this again shows that we're starting to see a pickup in enrollment. And there's a reason for this that I'll get to momentarily. And then just to broaden the picture a little bit to the Puget Sound, this is the net change in enrollment over the past year for the 4-county region. Okay, so again, here's Pierce County. Net gain of 1,169 students. Snohomish grew a little. They grew a little more last year. King County's been growing by about 4,000 or more students since 2011. So they've been showing really big gains. And this is the first time in well over a decade, maybe 15 years, since we saw any growth in Kitsap County in K-12 enrollment. I mean, it's been a downward slide for a really long time. And yet this year, Bremerton and South Kitsap saw some gains. And so we're starting to see sort of a turnaround. So the message of all these enrollment slides is, first of all, you look at your district, you're a growing district, so you're going to see growth no matter what. We've had a period where growth slowed because of the housing bubble bursting. We're really starting to see some changes in that, and I'm actually expecting enrollment to show gains everywhere over the next decade or so, and we'll talk about why here in just a second. So why is enrollment growing now? So what I've done on this chart is I've shown the average annual number of births in each county from 1996 to 2005. So think about that for a second. Kids born in 2005 would be eligible for school in 2010. So, we have to kind of think that way. And then the births since 1996 to 2005. And the reason I chose that is 2006 and 2007 were sort of record birth years nationally as well as locally. But we're also starting to see bigger birth trends in all the counties and throughout the state. And so if you look at King County, for example, between 1996 and 2005, there were about 22,000 births a year. Since 1996, that's been almost 3,000 higher a year. So think about that. That's 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's 8 years if you count 2006 in there. 3,000 more a year for 8 years, that's a lot of kids, okay? And then you look at Kitsap, that's one that's kind of been lagging. Their birth trends have not picked up. Pierce County, again, over 1,000 more births per year since 2006. So again, that's 8,000 more kids over that 8-year period. And then Snohomish County, about 700 more. So what we're seeing is we're starting to see a trend here. We're having higher births. You might say, why is that? Now, some of you may have been on the board before when I've talked to you, and I've talked about this sort of cyclical trend. So we had the baby boomers leave the schools in the 70s. About the mid-late 80s into the 90s, we saw the children of baby boomers come in. We saw some gains in enrollment in the 90s. Now we're getting to the point where the children of baby boomers are having births, having kids, and so we're starting to see the grandchildren of baby boomers. So we're starting another cycle. So when I say, the reason I'm saying that I think you're going to see net gains in enrollment throughout the Puget Sound over the next decade, one of the big reasons for that is we're going to have larger birth cohorts entering the school. And so already we're seeing bigger gains at elementary in King County and Pierce County and Snohomish County. So that's kind of a trend that's coming. And that doesn't just affect, Bethel, that affects everybody. So this is the birth trend for King County. The yellow lines represent actual births from 2013, and then going forward, this is a projection. So basically, since 2006 or so, births have been about 11,000 or more. There's one exception to this. I need to point this out because this is next year's cohort. 2010 was a low birth year. Maybe the economy, maybe something like that. So it was under 11,000, but you can see the 3 years since then it's been over 11,000. And for the future, given the number of women in that, it's 15 to 44 is considered childbearing years. Most of the births are 20 to 30 women who are 20 to 35. We're having more women in that age group. So as a result, even though birth rates aren't changing, they're having the same number of kids, the sheer number of women in those age groups means you're going to have more births over time. So we're looking at births of 11,000 for the foreseeable future here. Okay. And this is based on fertility rates, how many children are born to women in certain age groups, laid over the forecast of the number of women in those age groups from the state. They forecast that information for every county. So what that means is more births means more kids over time. This is a forecast of the K-12 population for Pierce County. We're around 128,000, 129,000 right now. So over time, it's going to jump by about 8,000 or so by 2020, and then another 6,000 as you go out a little bit further. The further out we go, the less reliable it is. Could be somewhat higher or lower, plus or minus a couple of thousand or so as you get further out here to 2025 and 2030. But nevertheless, that shows the effect of some of those births as more kids are born and they roll into elementary and then eventually they roll up into secondary. But let's look at Bethel specifically, and this is one of the reasons why you're going to continue to see growth in Bethel. This is housing data. This was done in November 2014. That is how many units were for sale. So there were 986 new home construction houses for sale in November 2014. 8 multifamily, was probably some not townhomes, but maybe some condo type developments, something like that. And then the pipeline represents homes that are out there. They've applied for them. They've got preliminary approval. They're not yet built yet. So you can see if you just add this up, that's about 6,000 houses that are currently either for sale or going to be built sometime in the near future in the Bethel School District. You're about second in terms of Pierce County. The highest number in any district that I looked at is Sumner. They have about 8,000 homes in their pipeline. A lot of it's in one big project in the southern end of their district, and some of that might actually get built in Ording. Puyallup, just to give you sort of a comparison, has about 3,200 homes in their pipeline. So you're kind of right up there at the top and about twice as many homes as Puyallup. So that's going to drive some future growth as well. So let's get the forecast. This was a forecast that was done back in 2010, 2011. It's the last time I talked to the school board. So I usually do a low, medium, and high. And I just kind of wanted to show you how the actual enrollment, so the black triangles and bar, that represents actual enrollment compared to the low, medium, and high forecast that I did 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And so you can see it's tracking somewhere in between the medium and the low. So it's kind of tracking there, not quite as dramatic growth as we saw if you went back to 2004, 2005 when the housing bubble was kind of inflating. But nevertheless, it's pretty much on track. And then if we go forward, this is kind of the current forecast. So if you look at this over a 20-year period, it does show continued growth. You'll notice, though, that the biggest arc is right here between 2015 and 2025 when those larger birth cohorts are coming in. But you'll notice that I showed you that the birth cohorts aren't getting much smaller beyond that. So you might say, well, why is it starting to level off a little bit here? One reason is it's way far out. We don't know exactly how much additional housing development there's going to be. But the second reason is, if you think about it, you get bigger elementary classes in over the last few years, the next several years. Eventually they roll up into high school. And so even if you have a certain number, same number of kids coming at kindergarten, eventually those graduating classes get bigger and they drag your enrollment down. So you need more housing growth or infill growth or something like that to sort of make up for that. So if you look at the state forecast, they show the same thing. The big sort of jump is 2015 to 2025, and then it's not quite as big of a gain as you get beyond that. Now I should point out, this is 20 years out. You know, we're speculating a little more the further out we get. So it's possible that there's enough, you know, infill housing, new housing development out here to keep that line going a little bit higher than this. But I just kind of wanted to show you why you get the dramatic increase in the first 10 years and then not quite as much in the last part of it. So this just gives you the medium forecast, which is my usually recommended forecast. I do a low and a high, and the low and high just show what might happen if population housing growth were less than or greater than the medium. And so it kind of shows you, again, you're at 18,251. Big jump to 2020, 19,878, that's a big gain. Big jump to here, and then again, you can see not quite as much growth as you get out here, but again, this is sort of the more uncertain area. So in summary, I expect better enrollment gains in the Puget Sound, Pierce County, and Bethel over the next decade, primarily due to large birth cohorts, but in your case, also because of the housing development. Elementary growth is going to be more substantial in the near term because you got larger birth cohorts, and then eventually as they roll up, you're going to see bigger secondary growth. There is one thing to watch. Fort Lewis did announce that they were going to have some reductions. It's probably not going to affect Bethel, Puyallup, and Tacoma as much as it might Thurston County and some of those areas. Yelm, for example, could be dramatically affected by any kind of significant change. But it's something to watch. We may see some years where that slows down if they do sort of decrease some of the troop levels, things like that. But again, I don't think it's as big of an issue in Pierce County as it is in Thurston and places like that. So for now, I'm predicting steady growth and not expecting any large gains, although again, you know, if you get a lot of housing development in a particular year, you could see a big bump up in one year, and other years you might see slower growth. But I wouldn't get fooled by you know, a year where enrollment doesn't grow a lot or it stays flat or something like that. I mean, if you just look at the development in the pipeline, you look at the births, you know, a little bump in the road doesn't mean, oh, it's all over, we don't have to worry about it. We can stop worrying about building new facilities or changing boundaries or anything like that. I think you're going to have to deal with that for the foreseeable future. So.